Boxing has always been full of characters from all walks of life. Given that it's a global sport, there will always be boxers that one may be familiar with, and those many people, including the hardcore fans, have never heard of. In most cases, boxers tend to have rivals during their careers, and it's not uncommon that a rival wasn't necessarily the best fighter they faced, or in some instances, a rival could have been a journeyman who never quite became a significant name in the sport, but just seemed to have a particular fighter's number. This is precisely the case in this video in the rivalry between two Australian fighters, young Pluto and former world featherweight champion, young Griffo. Before we dive in, like, subscribe, and comment if you are a fan of boxing history, as we will continue to highlight the more obscure boxers who made a name for themselves in the most complex eras in boxing. Young Pluto, born William Dudley Brown in Port Elizabeth, South Africa in 1870, though some sources do vary, is a featherweight who fought from 1885 to 1911. Mainly in Australia, which would become his adopted home. Outside of his name, and even that may be a stretch, nothing really stands out. He had a record of 17 victories, 9 losses, 11 draws. 11 of his victories came via knockout. He also had 8 no decisions, along with 2 no contests. At face value, I can certainly understand someone scrolling past young Pluto without even having a second thought about it. This is a sharp contrast to his counterpart and main rival, young Griffo. Born Albert Griffiths in Bendigo, Victoria, Australia in 1869, Griffo was and is to this day the more known commodity, having captured the world featherweight title on September 2nd, 1890 by defeating Torpedo Billy Murphy. Griffo would hold on to the title for about 2 years and has shared the ring with a number of the most elite boxers of the era in or around his weight class. His record, outstanding. He had 68 victories, 11 losses, and 38 draws. 33 of his wins came via knockout. Additionally, he had 81 no decisions and 31 no contests. Keep in mind that this was during an era of no decisions, so Griffo had over 200 official fights. Griffo fought names such as Joe Gans, George Kid Levine, George Dixon, and I could go down a rabbit hole, but I'll stop there. All world champions. Now, what if I told you Griffo's greatest fight was with young Pluto? For all intents and purposes, it was widely noted that each of their fights was a draw. Sometimes, though, records can be a bit deceiving. Recollecting on his rivalry with young Griffo in a December 1927 article shortly after Griffo's death, young Pluto stated, "Outside the ring, I hated Griffo and had no time for him. I wanted to punch him every time I saw him. But he was a wonderful boxer, and inside the ring, he was a master with the gloves. I think he was the greatest boxer who ever lived, and can't help feeling sorry that he's dead." Young Pluto and young Griffo first met on April 30th, 1888 at Victor's Athletic Hall in Melbourne. The fight was scheduled for 10 rounds. Young Pluto himself stated that Griffo was about 16 years old and he was a year older, which puts Pluto's age at around 17 at the time. This, like the bulk of their fights, was a draw. Griffo came into the contest with a record of 9-1-3, while Pluto came into the contest sporting a record of 9-3-6. So this was early in the career of both of these ring warriors, and that's usually where rivalries are born. The two would meet for a second time on May 25th, 1888, though some sources say May 26th, at Open Field in Melbourne. This contest would be a scheduled fight to the finish, and ultimately it would end in a draw after 19 rounds. This is what records on a number of the boxing sites list, but Pluto himself recalled the second fight as follows. The second fight took place in the Hibernian Hall as a preliminary on the night that Jack Burke and Peter Newton fought a championship bout. Griffo and I went 8 rounds, and like the first fight, it was declared a draw. Now, Burke and Newton did fight 5 straight times in 1888, and the first fight was at Hibernian Hall on May 7th, but neither was on the date that is recorded for the second meeting between Pluto and Griffo. So maybe it's an anomaly or some dates are slightly off. I mean, we are talking over 100 years ago. Also, who are we to not take young Pluto's own quotes for the fight? Additionally, young Pluto noted another fight that seemingly isn't recorded in the record books. Well, I'll let you judge. The following are his exact quotes. "We both hated each other, and the bad feeling was played on by some of the men in the game did. They used to egg us on, and we decided to have a fight to a finish. The police, however, were against it, and so arrangements were made secretly for us to fight in a fruit garden at Ringwood. We fought with skin gloves, and the fight went 26 rounds. It was arranged by Sir John Madden and Jack Doherty. Griffo's backers for 25 pounds was a man named Bert Whistler. We were roused out of our beds at 1:30 o'clock in the morning and driven 24 miles in cabs to the fighting field. My seconds were Jack Graham, a champion club swinger, and Jack Burnett, Paddy Slavin's trainer. Griffo's seconds were Jack King and Benny Williams. The latter is now on the Goldfields. We got to the fighting ground around 9 o'clock and were soon hard at it. I don't like to say it myself, but I knocked Griffo down 22 times that day. Griffo was a hard man to knock out. He was trying to turn it up, and a man named Tom Guernev, who had 10 pounds on Griffo, could see he was beaten and called out, "The police are coming." We scattered in all directions, but it was a false alarm. I went up to the Ringwood railway station with the late Jim Donegan, and Griffo and his men were there. Something was said about going on with the fight, and I walked up and punched Griffo, but he wouldn't go on with it, and so we all went back to Melbourne. Legendary. Their third fight would take place on June 6, 1888. The location was again Melbourne at Victor's Athletic Hall. Once again, it would be a draw after 13 rounds in a fight to the finish. Well, that's at least what's been recorded. Young Pluto, though, had a different take, stating, "The third fight took place at Hibernian Hall just after Slavin and Burke had fought for the championship. By this time, there was a lot of bad blood between Griffo and myself. Billy Bovis, a comedian and a great friend of Griffo's, taunted me about Griffo, and I said I'd fight him for as much as he'd like in the open. But Griffo declined to fight anywhere else but in the ring. So the fight was arranged, and we went 16 rounds in a 12-by-14 ring. There were about 26 people present, and the fight was so desperate and gory that nearly everybody around the ring was covered in blood. Some of the men wanted to get out, but an order was given that the first man who tried to open the door would be knocked out. At the end of 16 rounds, Billy Smith had a talk with my seconds, Peter Newton and Jack Barnett. And being afraid that we'd kill each other, they stopped the fight. We were both sent to the hospital, and the fight was declared one of the best Melbourne men had ever seen. Griffo got to the hospital before me, and the late Dr. Charles Ryan had just finished stitching his lips when I arrived. As soon as I saw Griffo, I flew at him, and in a second, we were fighting again among patients, nurses, and the attendants. Somebody called the police, but before they arrived, Griffo and I were separated and got away. Griffo caught the train to Sydney that night, and I went to Geelong and stayed there for a month with James Wilson and the late Donald Wallace. In the meantime, Sir John Madden fixed up everything so that I, at any rate, would not be prosecuted. Griffo came back quietly from Sydney and was playing billiards at Sam Nixon's when a policeman walked in and arrested him. He was fined £5. The fourth meeting between the two would take place on September 1st, 1888, at the Apollo Athletic Hall in Melbourne. This would ultimately be a 4-rounder, and Griffo will walk away with what is listed as a newspaper decision, having got the better of Pluto. Now, like a couple of the other fights, according to young Pluto himself, his fourth meeting with Griffo is actually a fight recorded as his fifth meeting with young Griffo, which took place on November 3rd, 1888. This is recorded as his fifth meeting based on the particulars. He stated, "My next fight with Griffo took place on Derby Day night in 1888, the day that the mighty Carbine was beaten by Ensign. We fought a 6-round preliminary to the fight between Jack Burke and Wolf Randolph." Now, the article captured the name as Wolf Randolph, but in actuality, it's Wolf Bendoff. Burke and Bendoff fought on November 3rd at the Hibernian Hall in Melbourne, a familiar place. Back to Pluto, I'll always remember that night. Somebody threw half a crown into the ring from a long way back, and it hit me on the back of the head, inflicting a deep wound, the mark of which I carry to this day. We only got 5 pounds for this fight, but we got the biggest shower from those present ever known in Melbourne. When the money that was thrown into the ring for us was counted, it totaled 80 pounds. Griffo then went to Sydney for 4 or 5 months and won several fights. When he returned, I challenged to fight him to a finish. The club members put up a 100-pound purse, and the fight was refereed by Professor Miller. Mr. Godfrey Watson was timekeeper. My seconds were Peter Newman, Jack Burnett, and Alfred Lamond. There was one thing connected with the fights I shall always remember. At the end of 20 rounds, Alfred Lamond said to Newton, "I'm settled. I can't fend Joe any longer." Seeing that he was knocked right up, I told him to sit down. Now from here, Pluto went on to describe a situation involving former world heavyweight champion James J. Corbett and young Griffo. In recalling such, young Pluto stated, "Griffo was an easy man to act as second for because he could do whatever he was told. He'd taunt the life out of you, for instance. He'd say to me, 'I'm going to hit you 10 times in the mouth this round, Joe.' And sure enough, he would smack, would come the glove, and that's 2, Griffo would say. Bang, bang, that's 4, he'd say, and you get the other half dozen quick and lively. Jim Corbett, the world's champion, also told me he tried to hit Griffo and couldn't. Corbett was taking his wife to the theater and called in at a saloon where Griffo was drinking. I tried to hit him, said Corbett, but couldn't land a blow till I dragged him to the floor, and then he kicked me in the face. He was full of every trick of the trade, and what Griffo couldn't do wasn't worth knowing. Well, that was the fella I had to fight to a finish at the Melbourne Athletic Club. Now, this was their 6th meeting, or potentially their 5th or beyond, depending on the sources. But either way, it would go down on December 12th, 1889, at the Melbourne Athletic Club. This would be their most epic bout, as this was a fight to the finish. Varying sources have it recorded as a 70-round fight, as well as a 48-rounder. Whatever the case may be, young Pluto himself described it as follows. It was agreed that it was to be our last fight. We entered the ring at 8:45 p.m. and finished at 2:15 a.m. It went 76 rounds, and years after, a friend of Griffo wrote me and said Griffo told him in America not long ago that it was the greatest fight of his career. I fought Tommy Ryan, Joe Gans, George Dixon, and Jack McAuliffe, said Griffo. But the best fighter of them all was Joe Pluto of Australia. It was a great tribute to pay me, but all the same, outside of the ring, I had no time for Griffo. As far as the fight, For the first 20 rounds of our big fight, Griffo never left me for 3 seconds. We were at it all the time and never ceased punching. Griffo was a man you couldn't spar with to make an opening because he always kept within hitting distance. We fought till we were smothered in blood and the floor was slippery with it. And the ringsiders almost saturated with it too. The members were good sports though and didn't mind a drop of blood. I remember Sir John Madden's white shirt front was literally spattered. My lips were cut to pieces and my whole body practically numbed. However, I knew I had only to keep going to beat Griffo. I knocked him down for the first time in the 51st round. And when he fell, I walked to my corner and said to Newton, "I've got him this time." Professor Miller had counted to 8 when Griffo got to his feet. I had a minute of the round left which to finish him, and although I aimed 100 blows at him, I never touched him. He was a marvel. He got right in close, and when I'd uppercut, his elbow would be in the way. I'd swing at his head and it wouldn't be there. He finished up by ducking under my guard and through my legs when the gong went. For 4 rounds after, I didn't land a glove on Griffo. He just made me look as if I'd never seen a boxing glove in my life, and there wasn't an inch of my body he didn't pepper. After an hour or so with Griffo, your body became so numb that you hardly knew you had legs and arms. Well, when we got to the 75th round, so much blood had been lost by both of us that a halt was called. Griffo's crowd then asked for the fight to be declared a draw, and my backers, all being gentlemen, agreed. The only satisfaction was the knowledge that the request came from Griffo's corner. There you have it, one of the most epic fights in history based on young Pluto's account. Now, the final meeting would be on November 14th, 1891 at Clark's Theatre in Melbourne, with Pluto dropping a 4-round newspaper decision at the hands of Griffo. This may have very well been the case, but the two men who really knew were no doubt young Pluto and young Griffo, so a number of the boxing sites do record this as being the final meeting as opposed to the 70-plus rounder. Now, while this was the end of the rivalry between the two, there are some other fights worth noting as it pertains to young Pluto. Now, on January 17th, 1899, he did face Little Chocolate George Dixon, who was a world featherweight champion at the time with the title on the line, losing in what was recorded as a 10th round knockout. Phenomenal feat given where Pluto started. He also had some other top caliber names under his belt like Tim Callahan, a former world title challenger. Now make no mistake about it, young Griffo was his rival. In relation to that 70-round fight, young Pluto noted that he and Griffo took at least 2 weeks to recover from the fight. In this same article where he recollect on those fights with Griffo, he also noted his start in the sport, saying, "I was born in South Africa and worked on the tugboats as a boy. When 12 years old, I had my first fight with another colored boy named Sultan. After that, I stowed away on a boat called the E.J. Spence, commanded by Captain Gill of Melbourne. He was very kind to me, and when we reached Melbourne, found me employment. The first fight I had in Australia was with Inspector West of the West Australian Police Force, who was recently transferred from Perth to Carnarvon. We fought a 6-round draw as a preliminary at Seymour near Melbourne. Mr. West got a little gold medal which he wears to this day. It is men like Mr. West I admire and respect both inside and outside the ring. He is a very fine gentleman." Now, in relation to young Griffo and in closing, young Pluto stated, Griffo was a master with the gloves, and although I feel very sorry that he is dead, I never liked him.